The mysterious visitor. The night was cold and restless on Outpost Delta 9, a small human colony on the edge of the galaxy. Heavy rain hammered against metal rooftops, and the neon lights of the settlement flickered as the storm raged on. Most of the outpost was asleep, except for a few night workers and one lone man, Ethan Voss. Ethan, a retired space trader, now ran a small bar near the docking bay. He had seen all kinds of travelers, miners, smugglers, bounty hunters, but tonight felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, as if something was about to happen. He was wiping down the counter, ready to close, when the door creaked open. A tall, hooded figure stepped inside. Rain dripped from the stranger's cloak, pooling on the floor. Ethan's grip tightened around the plasma pistol hidden beneath the counter. He had learned long ago that a late-night visitor was never a good sign. The figure hesitated, then slowly pulled back the hood. Underneath was an alien woman, but not just any kind. Her violet eyes glowed faintly, and strange metallic tattoos shimmered on her skin, symbols Ethan didn't recognize. She spoke in a hushed, urgent voice. "I need shelter, just for tonight. No questions. I can pay." Ethan raised an eyebrow. This was trouble. He knew it. Strangers looking for no-questions deals always brought danger with them. But then, the woman reached into her cloak and pulled out a small pouch. She tossed it onto the counter. It landed with a metallic clink. Stardust. Ethan's breath hitched. Stardust was rare, more valuable than gold, more valuable than most metals in this part of the galaxy. This wasn't small-time trouble. This was big. He looked at the woman again. She was breathing heavily, her hands shaking slightly. Whoever she was running from had her terrified. Ethan sighed. He should have said no. He should have sent her away. But his curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed the pouch and nodded toward a corner booth. "Sit there. Keep your hood up." She hesitated, scanning the room as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. Then, without a word, she obeyed. Ethan locked the door and returned to the bar, pretending to mind his own business. But he was watching. Who was she running from? And why? The alarms outside. Minutes passed in silence. The storm outside grew stronger, the wind howling through the settlement's narrow alleys. Then, alarms blared. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the outpost speakers. "Attention. A fugitive is among you. Harboring them is a crime. Report any suspicious individuals immediately." Ethan's blood ran cold. So, she was a fugitive. Slowly, he turned toward the woman. She wasn't just running. She was being hunted. She had gone completely still in her seat. Her eyes met his. She knew he had figured it out. Ethan cursed under his breath. He should have never let her in. He had spent years staying out of trouble. He wasn't a hero. He didn't fight battles. But now, it was too late. Heavy boots thundered outside as a squad of bounty hunters marched into the outpost. Through the window, Ethan saw them, a team of 6, armed to the teeth, scanning every building. At the front stood their leader, a cybernetic enforcer with glowing red eyes and a body made of steel. Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't a regular bounty hunt. This was a manhunt. "They will kill everyone." The woman stood suddenly. "They will search this place." Her voice was urgent. "If they find me, they won't just take me. They will kill everyone here." Ethan frowned. "Why?" She hesitated. Then she pulled something from beneath her cloak, a small metallic cube with glowing symbols. "Because I stole this." Ethan stared at it. It didn't look like a weapon. It didn't look like anything he had seen before. But the way she held it, the fear in her eyes, told him that whatever it was important. Outside, the sound of bounty hunters smashing doors grew louder. They were getting closer. Ethan had a choice. He could turn her in and save himself, or he could hide her and make himself a target, a decision that changes everything. The woman took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Please, If you help me, I will tell you everything. But if they take me, everyone on this planet will suffer." Ethan exhaled sharply. This was exactly the kind of mess he had tried to avoid all his life. But then he looked outside. The bounty hunters had reached the building next door. They had minutes, maybe seconds. Ethan made his decision. He turned to the woman. "Follow me, and don't make a sound." And just like that, his simple, quiet life was over. The bounty hunters arrive. The rain had slowed to a whisper outside, but the tension inside Ethan Voss's bar was suffocating. The alarm still echoed through Outpost Delta 9, sending waves of unease through the colony's narrow streets. Ethan's heart pounded as he moved swiftly behind the counter, wiping away the puddle of water the alien woman had left behind. No evidence, no mistakes. The woman, Lysara, stood motionless, her violet eyes locked onto the door. Outside, the rhythmic thud of approaching boots sent a cold shiver down Ethan's spine. They were here. Through the half-fogged window, he could see them now. 6 bounty hunters, all in reinforced combat gear, their visors glowing in the dim outpost lights. But it was their leader who stood out. A towering figure in black cybernetic armor, his face hidden behind a sleek metal helmet with glowing red optics. A single name was etched into his shoulder plate: Vorik. Ethan knew that name. A ghost from the past. Vorik wasn't just a bounty hunter. He was a butcher, and he never left survivors. A deadly announcement. The enforcer's voice boomed through the colony speakers. "Attention, citizens of Outpost Delta 9. You are harboring a fugitive. Turn her over now, and your colony remains untouched. Fail to comply, and you all suffer." The air grew colder. The silence in the bar was deafening. Ethan didn't move. Lysara, hidden behind the bar now, clutched the small glowing cube close to her chest. She whispered, "They will not stop. They will tear this place apart." Ethan didn't doubt it. He had seen what men like Vorik did when they didn't get what they wanted. A sharp, electrified buzz filled the air as one of the bounty hunters raised a shock rifle and fired, not at a person, but at the nearest building. A small power station exploded, sending a blast of sparks and fire into the rainy night. A warning shot. Ethan's stomach twisted. They weren't bluffing. Vorik stepped forward, his robotic voice sharp and emotionless. "Last chance. Hand her over. Now." Ethan glanced at Lysara. She was out of time, and so was he. No way out. Lysara's breathing was shallow. Ethan could see the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wasn't just running for her life. She was running for something bigger. And Ethan, against every instinct in his body, had already chosen a side. He gritted his teeth. No turning back now. "I have an idea," he whispered, "but you're not going to like it." She raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Just keep me out of their hands." That was the plan. The smuggler's trick. Ethan reached under the bar and pressed a hidden switch beneath the counter. A metal hatch near the floor slid open silently. A tunnel. Lysara's eyes widened. "You've had an escape route this whole time." Ethan smirked. "Let's just say, I've made enemies before." She didn't waste time asking questions. Without hesitation, she slipped into the tunnel, vanishing into the shadows below. Ethan sealed the hatch, covering it with a heavy metal crate just as the door burst open. The bounty hunters stormed in, weapons raised, their glowing visors scanning the room. Ethan leaned against the bar, arms crossed. He kept his face calm, unbothered, normal. Vorik stepped inside, his heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. The air in the bar grew heavy with tension. Ethan locked eyes with him. "Evening, Vorik. Long time." The enforcer tilted his head. "Voss, you should know better than to lie to me." Ethan shrugged. "I don't know what you're talking about." Vorik's visor glowed brighter, scanning the room. Then, slowly, he raised his left hand and crushed a metal chair into dust. His cybernetic strength was off the charts. "I will not ask again," Vorik said. "Where is she?" Ethan exhaled. Time to make a choice. A dangerous bluff. He pushed away from the bar, stepping forward casually, as if he wasn't facing a squad of armed killers. "I don't harbor fugitives, Vorik," he said, keeping his tone light. "I run a bar. I serve drinks. That's it." Vorik's head tilted slightly, scanning him. Then, with no warning, a fist slammed into Ethan's gut. A wave of pain exploded through him as he crashed into the counter, knocking bottles to the floor. He gasped, barely staying on his feet. Vorik hadn't even punched him full force. The enforcer crouched slightly, his mechanical fingers flexing. "Let's try again." Ethan wiped blood from his mouth. He had to hold his ground, had to buy Lysera time. "Like I said," he grunted, "I don't know anything." Vorik studied him for a long moment. Then, he turned to his squad. "Burn the colony down. Let's see if the locals are more cooperative." Ethan's stomach dropped. They were going to destroy the entire outpost, all because of Lysera. He had thought he could stall them, thought he could play it smart. But now, he was watching his home turn into a war zone. Through the open door, Ethan saw it. Buildings being torched, people running, explosions ripping through the colony. And all of it because of the alien woman hiding beneath his bar. Ethan had to act. Now. He wasn't a hero, never wanted to be. But tonight, he didn't have a choice. The silent massacre. Flames lit the night sky as Outpost Delta 9 burned. Explosions thundered through the colony, shaking buildings and sending terrified citizens running for their lives. The bounty hunters worked with cold precision, executing anyone who resisted, tearing through homes and businesses in their hunt for Lysera. Ethan Voss watched in horror from the small, hidden passage beneath his bar. The narrow tunnel was dark, the air thick with dust, but through a cracked panel in the floor, he could see Vorik and his men outside. The enforcer was watching the destruction unfold, completely emotionless. The colony had been his home for 5 years. He had stayed out of trouble, kept his head down. Now, it was a battlefield. And all of it was because of the alien woman crouched beside him in the darkness. This is only the beginning. Lysera was silent, gripping the glowing cube in her hands. The pulsing light from the artifact reflected off her violet eyes, her face twisted in frustration and guilt. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Even if I surrender. They will kill everyone here just to be sure." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then what the hell do we do?" Lysera's gaze flickered toward him. "We get out of here. We find a way off this rock. And then," she hesitated, "we destroy them first." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan on doing that?" She took a slow breath. Then, for the first time since arriving at his bar, she told him the truth. The cube's dark secret. The artifact in Lysera's hands wasn't just stolen tech, it was something far more dangerous. "This is not a weapon," she said. "It is a message." Ethan frowned. "A message?" Lysera nodded. "An ancient one. From a race that should no longer exist. A warning about what's coming." Ethan didn't like the sound of that. "And what exactly is coming?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Something worse than Vorik. Something worse than war." Ethan exhaled sharply. That was vague and dramatic. But he believed her. He didn't know why, but looking at her, seeing the desperation in her face, he felt something deep in his gut telling him that she wasn't lying. But that didn't change the fact that Vorik was already here and ready to kill them. They needed to move. The first casualty. Outside, Vorik stepped forward, his glowing red eyes scanning the ruins of the outpost. He turned his head slightly, then raised a single armored hand. The bounty hunters dragged a man into the street. Ethan's chest tightened. Garrick. The old trader was beaten, his face bloody, his clothes torn. He had run one of the small repair shops near the docks, always grumpy, but never a coward. Vorik's metallic voice cut through the night. "Tell me, human, where is the fugitive?" Garrick spat blood onto the ground. "Go to hell." Vorik was silent for a moment. Then, without warning, his arm shifted. A hidden blade shot out. Ethan barely had time to react before Vorik plunged the blade straight through Garrick's chest. A single, sharp gasp. Then nothing. Ethan's hands tightened into fists as he watched his friend collapse onto the street, lifeless. Lysera flinched beside him. "That was a warning," Vorik announced, looking around. "The next one will not be so quick." Ethan could feel the anger rising inside him, mixing with something deeper, something darker. He had avoided fights for years. He had run from war, run from trouble. But tonight, trouble had found him, and it had just killed someone he cared about. No more running. The plan to escape. Ethan took a slow breath and looked at Lysera. "You have a ship, right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Hidden outside the colony. In the cliffs. But it's damaged." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Then we're fixing it. And getting out of here." Lysera's brow furrowed. "You don't even know where I need to go." Ethan glanced back at Garrick's body in the street, then at the bounty hunters patrolling the burning colony, hunting for survivors. "I don't care," he said. "We're getting off this planet. And then we're taking these bastards down." Lysera watched him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Then let's move before we both end up dead." The first step to war. They moved quickly through the dark tunnels, crawling beneath the colony, avoiding patrols. Every now and then, the walls shook from distant explosions. When they finally reached the surface again, Ethan took one last look at Outpost Delta 9. His home was gone. His old life was over. And for the first time in years, he wasn't just a bartender anymore. He was a soldier again. The escape plan. The tunnels beneath Outpost Delta 9 were damp, narrow, and smelled of rust. Ethan Voss led the way, his breathing steady but his mind racing. The weight of what he had just witnessed, the slaughter of his home, the murder of Garrick, the destruction of everything he had built, burned inside him like a fire he couldn't put out. Behind him, Lysera moved silently, clutching the glowing cube to her chest. The artifact pulsed with a rhythmic light, casting eerie shadows along the tunnel walls. Ethan glanced back at her. "Your ship. Where exactly is it?" She hesitated, then answered. 2 kilometers north of the colony, hidden in the cliffside caves. I landed it there weeks ago after I stole the cube." Ethan frowned. "Weeks ago?" "Wait," he said. "You've been hiding on this planet for that long. With Vorik hunting you." Lysera's expression darkened. "I had no choice. The ship took damage when I escaped. And finding a pilot I could trust wasn't exactly easy." Ethan let out a dry chuckle. "Lucky me." But luck had nothing to do with it. He had made his choice when he let her into his bar. Now, there was no turning back. The colony falls. They reached the end of the tunnel and climbed up an old maintenance hatch. Cold air hit them like a slap to the face. Ethan turned and froze. From their hidden position on a ridge, they had a clear view of Outpost Delta 9, or what was left of it. Fires raged across the colony. Buildings were crumbling. Bodies littered the streets. And in the center of it all, Vorik stood motionless, watching his men sweep through the wreckage. His red optics glowed in the darkness. A transport ship landed nearby, and Ethan saw prisoners being dragged aboard. Survivors, likely taken for interrogation or worse. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had always been a survivor, always looked out for himself. But this was a massacre, and it was his fault. Lysera put a hand on his arm. "We need to move. Now." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Let's go." The hunt begins. They moved quickly, staying low, cutting through rocky paths as they made their way toward the cliffs. The rain had stopped, but the night air was thick with smoke and the scent of burning metal. Every step felt like walking through a graveyard. Halfway through the trek, Ethan stopped suddenly and raised a hand. Lysera tensed. "What is it?" Ethan pointed up at the night sky. A fleet of drones, small, fast, and deadly, were scanning the ground below. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. Vorik wasn't just searching the colony. He was searching the entire sector. They had to move fast. Lysera nodded toward a series of jagged rock formations ahead. "We cut through there. It will slow them down." Ethan smirked. "You sound like you've done this before." She gave him a sideways glance. "Running, fighting, hiding? More times than I can count." Ethan grunted. "Then let's hope you're as good at flying as you are at running." The betrayal. They were nearly at the cliffside cave when a voice called out from the shadows. "You two are worth a lot of credits." Ethan spun around Conrays. A figure stepped forward. Garrick's old business partner, Joran. Ethan's stomach twisted. He should have known. Joran was always an opportunist. The man smirked. "I could have walked away, Ethan. Could have left the colony before all this went down. But then Vorik made me an offer. And I figured, why let good credits go to waste?" Ethan's grip on his pistol tightened. "You sold out your own people," he growled. Joran shrugged. "They were going to die anyway." Lysera whispered, "Ethan, we don't have time for this." But Joran wasn't alone. 3 more men stepped out of the shadows, armed and ready. Ethan calculated his odds. They weren't great. Then, suddenly, a sharp whistling sound cut through the air. Lysera moved like lightning, twisting her hand in a precise motion. One of Joran's men choked. His body suddenly lifted off the ground. His gun slipped from his fingers, his eyes wide with terror. He couldn't breathe. Ethan watched in shock as the man's body twisted violently, bones snapping in ways they weren't meant to. Then he collapsed, dead. The others staggered back, horrified. Joran's smirk vanished. "What the hell?" Lysera turned to Ethan. Her eyes glowed brighter than before. "Shoot them," she said, her voice calm. Ethan didn't hesitate. 1 shot. Joran went down. Another. His last 2 men fell before they could even react. Silence. Lysera stared at the bodies, her expression unreadable. Ethan lowered his gun. "You want to tell me what the hell that was?" She exhaled. "The less you know, the safer you'll be." Ethan glanced at the bodies on the ground. Safe. He doubted that was even possible anymore. The ship in the cliffs. They finally reached the cave, a massive hollow carved into the cliffs. And there, hidden beneath tarps and rock, was Lysera's ship. It was old, battered, and barely holding together, but it was their only way out. Ethan ran toward the entrance. "How bad is it?" Lysera climbed aboard, pressing a hand against the ship's control panel. The screens flickered weakly. "Bad," she admitted. "It needs at least 10 minutes to power up." Ethan cursed. They didn't have 10 minutes. A distant whirring sound made them both freeze. The drones had found them. Red lights flashed in the distance. Ethan grabbed his rifle. "I'll hold them off." Lysera's eyes met his. "Don't die." He smirked. "No promises." As the first drone shot toward them, Ethan took aim and fired. Betrayal and the chase. The night sky over Outpost Delta 9 was on fire. Smoke billowed upward, mixing with the storm clouds, creating an eerie glow that flickered in shades of orange and red. The colony was gone. But Ethan Voss and Lysera weren't. They were alive. For now. Inside the cliffside cave, Lysera frantically worked on her battered starship's controls, her fingers moving across the dimly lit console with expert speed. The ship was an old stealth-class cruiser, designed for evasion rather than combat. Unfortunately, it wasn't moving at all. Ethan crouched at the entrance of the cave, his rifle locked and loaded. Outside, the night was filled with the mechanical hum of approaching drones. Red scanning lights swept across the rocky terrain, searching for heat signatures, looking for them. He had to buy Lysera time. How much longer? he muttered, his eyes locked on the distant lights of the search patrol. Lysera hissed through her teeth. The core is still cold. I need at least 5 more minutes. Ethan let out a breath. We don't have 5 minutes. The first wave. A sharp mechanical whine cut through the night air. Then, the first drone spotted them. Ethan rolled to the side just as a red-hot energy beam sliced through the air, melting the rock wall where he had been standing a second before. They found us. Lysera shouted. Ethan gritted his teeth, raised his rifle, and fired back. The shot struck the drone's sensor module, disrupting its targeting system, but it wasn't enough to take it down. Another 3 drones appeared over the ridge, their sleek, metallic bodies glowing with deadly energy. Ethan cursed. He had faced drones before, back when he was still a soldier, but not this many, and not with so little cover. He switched to his EMP rounds and took aim. 1 shot. The first drone dropped, spiraling out of control before smashing into the ground. 2 more still hovered, their weapons charging up for another strike. Ethan moved. Fast. He threw himself behind a rock just as plasma fire rained down, scorching the dirt, sending debris flying. They were pinned. The bounty hunter's clothes, in Ethan's comm device, crackled to life. A voice, deep and metallic, filled the air. You cannot run forever. Voss. Ethan's jaw clenched. Vorik. Give us the girl, and I may let you live. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. That's funny, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the one losing people. Vorik's voice remained cold. You think you can win this fight? Against me. Against the Dominion. Ethan's hands tightened around his rifle. He wasn't stupid. This wasn't a fight he could win. Not in a straight battle. But winning wasn't the plan. The plan was to escape. Lysera's voice came over the ship's intercom. Ethan. The engines are charging. Just a little more. Not fast enough. Because now, it wasn't just drones coming for them. Ethan spotted dark figures moving over the ridge. Bounty hunters. At least 10 of them. Armed. Trained. Ready. And leading them. Vorik himself. Shit. Ethan muttered. The last stand before takeoff. Vorik raised his hand, and his men opened fire. The night exploded with plasma bolts, turning the cave entrance into a death trap. Ethan dived behind a fallen boulder, barely avoiding the hail of destruction. Lysera's voice was frantic. 1 minute. Just hold them for 1 more minute. 1 minute felt like a lifetime. Ethan peeked out and fired 3 quick shots. 1 bounty hunter collapsed, but the others kept coming. Too many. Then Vorik moved. The massive cybernetic enforcer leaped into the air, covering an impossible distance before landing just meters away from Ethan. The ground shook from the impact. Ethan barely had time to react before Vorik was on him. A metal fist smashed into Ethan's side, sending him crashing into a rock wall. Pain exploded through his ribs. Ethan coughed, spitting blood, his vision spinning. Vorik loomed over him, his glowing red optics unreadable, inhuman. You were never going to win. Voss. Ethan laughed weakly, despite the pain. Yeah. Well, I wasn't trying to. Then, the ship's thrusters roared to life. The final gamble. Lysera's voice shouted over the intercom. Ethan, get in. Vorik grabbed him by the throat, lifting him off the ground. Ethan struggled, feeling his air cut off. He needed to think. Fast. Then, his eyes flicked to the EMP grenade clipped to his belt. He grinned. With his last bit of strength, he grabbed the grenade, activated it, and shoved it against Vorik's chest. Let's see how much of you is still metal. The explosion of energy tore through Vorik's cybernetic systems, causing his entire body to seize up. His grip loosened, and Ethan dropped to the ground, gasping for air. He didn't waste a second. With everything he had left, he sprinted toward the ship. The bounty hunters fired after him, but he dove through the hatch just as Lysera slammed the ramp shut. Engines at full power, the ship lurched upward, blasting off from the ground. Ethan collapsed onto the floor, groaning. Lysera knelt beside him, her eyes filled with concern. "You okay?" Ethan coughed, wincing. "Ask me in 5 minutes." Through the ship's viewport, he saw Vorik rising to his feet, damaged but still alive. And he knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The final stand. The ship rattled violently as it tore through the atmosphere, its engines groaning under the strain. Flames licked the hull, and alarms blared through the cockpit. Ethan Voss gripped the co-pilot's chair, his knuckles white. Behind him, Lysera worked furiously, her fingers flying across the console, trying to override the ship's failing systems. "Tell me we're not dead yet," Ethan muttered, blinking through the smoke filling the cabin. Lysera didn't answer. Instead, she yanked a lever hard to the left, and the ship veered sharply, dodging a plasma missile that screamed past their hull, exploding in a fiery burst. Ethan swore under his breath. They weren't just running. They were being hunted. The pursuit. 3 sleek Black Dominion interceptors streaked through the upper atmosphere, their engines humming with deadly precision. Vorik's ships. Ethan could picture him now, watching them from below, cold and calculating, already planning their next move. He gritted his teeth. No way in hell was he going back down there. Lysera flicked a switch, and a holographic display appeared, showing their pursuers. "They're gaining," she said, her voice tight. "And we have no weapons." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Of course we don't." Lysera shot him a glare. This was a stealth ship. It wasn't built for dogfights. "That makes 2 of us," Ethan muttered, strapping himself into the seat. Outside, one of the Dominion interceptors broke formation, accelerating ahead of the others. A glowing red targeting reticle locked onto their ship. Lysera yanked the controls sharply, sending them into a stomach-churning spiral. The missile launched. Ethan braced for impact. Boom! The explosion lit up the sky, shaking the entire ship. But they were still alive. Lysera let out a sharp breath. They missed. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he checked the readings. No, that was a warning shot. The Dominion didn't want to destroy them. They wanted to disable them. And that meant one thing: capture. A desperate gamble. Ethan looked at Lysera. "Can you push this thing into hyperspace?" She clenched her jaw. "It's not ready yet. The core is still charging." Ethan glanced at the controls. "How much more time?" A pause. Then, 2 minutes. Ethan groaned. "We don't have 2 minutes." Behind them, the Dominion ships adjusted formation, their laser cannons charging up. Lysera gripped the controls tighter. "I know." She suddenly slammed a button, and the ship's rear thrusters flared bright. Ethan felt his stomach drop as they jerked into a rapid dive, heading straight for the planet's ring system, a massive field of ice and rock debris circling the atmosphere. "This is insane," Ethan shouted. "No, this is our only chance," Lysera yelled back. She pulled them deeper into the ring field, weaving between tumbling asteroids, jagged ice chunks, and broken satellites. The Dominion ships followed. "They're still on us," Ethan warned. Lysera's grip tightened. "They won't be for long." She suddenly cut the engines. The ship lurched violently, the artificial gravity struggling to adjust. The Dominion pilots, expecting a predictable flight pattern, overshot them, their ships zooming ahead just slightly. That was all Lysera needed. She punched the thrusters again, twisting the ship into a tight maneuver, slipping into the blind spot of the lead interceptor. Ethan's eyes widened. "You're not seriously gonna..." Boom! Lysera threw the ship's wing straight into the interceptor's engine, shredding the enemy ship apart in a sudden, brutal explosion. 1 down, 2 left. Ethan stared at her. That was reckless. She smirked. "You're still alive, aren't you?" "Barely." Vorik's next move. A sudden transmission came through the comms. Ethan recognized the voice immediately. "Vorik." Impressive, the enforcer's voice rumbled. Still calm, still unreadable. But you won't escape me, Voss. Ethan rolled his eyes. You keep saying that, but here we are. Vorik ignored the jab. Tell me something, the enforcer continued. Do you really think she's telling you everything? Ethan glanced at Lysara. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Vorik chuckled. She didn't tell you what that cube really is, did she? Ethan hesitated. He had been wondering that himself. Vorik's voice darkened. She's leading you to your death, Voss. Surrender now, and I may let you live. Ethan snorted. Yeah, see, I don't really believe you. Something about how you stabbed my friend through the chest makes me think you're not the forgiving type. Vorik was silent for a moment. Then, very well. The remaining two interceptors split up, taking opposite flanks. Lysara cursed. They're boxing us in. Ethan's mind raced. They needed a way out. Then, he saw it. Through the asteroid field, just beyond the chaos, was a derelict warship. A massive, ancient vessel, long abandoned, floating just beyond the debris field. A perfect place to hide. Head there. Ethan pointed. Lysara followed his gaze, her eyes widening. That's suicide. It's better than getting shot down. She gritted her teeth but swerved toward the wreckage. Into the ghost ship. The Dominion interceptors gave chase, still firing, but Lysara twisted through the broken hulls of the abandoned warship, narrowly avoiding collisions. Ethan barely had time to breathe before their ship suddenly lurched, scraping against a crumbling docking port. Alarms blared. They were inside. Lysara slammed the controls, shutting the engines down. The ship settled inside the wreckage, hidden in the shadows. The Dominion ships circled outside, searching. Ethan held his breath. Did it work? A long pause. Then, the Dominion ships moved on, disappearing into the asteroid field. Ethan exhaled. They had escaped. For now, the truth revealed. The dead silence inside the derelict warship was deafening. Ethan Voss exhaled slowly, gripping his side as he pushed himself up from the co-pilot's chair. His body ached from the fight, from the escape, from barely surviving. Outside the ship's cracked viewport, the Dominion interceptors drifted through the asteroid field, scanning for signs of movement. The stealth field around Lysara's ship was holding for now, but Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before Vorik's men found them. They had bought minutes, maybe an hour at best. Ethan turned toward Lysara, who sat hunched over the control panel, fingers still poised over the glowing console. All right, he said, voice edged with exhaustion. You want to tell me why Vorik said that cube is more than just a message? Lysara didn't look at him. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the cube over in her palms, watching the pulsating blue light within it. Because he's right, she whispered. It's not just a message. It's a trigger. Ethan frowned. A trigger for what? She finally lifted her gaze, her glowing violet eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before. Fear. For a war that should have never been forgotten. The ghost ship. A deep groan echoed through the wreckage of the warship, the sound of shifting metal reverberating through the walls. Ethan stiffened. They weren't alone. The derelict ship had been abandoned for centuries, drifting in deep space, long before Outpost Delta 9 had even existed. It belonged to a race that had vanished long before humanity had taken its place among the stars. But something was still here. We should move, Ethan said, stepping toward the hatch. Lysara nodded, securing the cube against her chest before following. The moment they stepped outside the ship, the silence swallowed them whole. Ethan adjusted his plasma pistol, scanning the long, rusted corridors. The ship's walls were covered in ancient alien carvings, symbols that flickered with faded light, as if they had once been powered by something no longer there. Lysara ran her fingers over one of the markings. This place is older than I thought, she murmured. A warship from the Precursor era. Ethan arched a brow. Precursor? She gave him a tight look. The First Empire. The ones who ruled before the Dominion. Before anyone else. Ethan exhaled. And let me guess, the Q is connected to them. Lysara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath. Not just connected. It's one of their last remaining relics. Ethan blinked. I'm going to regret asking. But what does it do? Lysara hesitated, then whispered, It wakes up something that should never wake up. The Vault of Shadows. A sudden rumble vibrated through the corridor. Ethan spun around, weapon raised. Something moved in the darkness. Lysara stiffened. No, that's impossible. This ship is supposed to be dead. Ethan wasn't convinced. Tell that to whoever's still walking around in here. They moved deeper into the wreckage, stepping cautiously over fallen debris and exposed wiring. The ship groaned like a dying beast, shifting under their weight. Then, they reached the core chamber. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. Before them was a massive, sealed vault, its doors covered in the same glowing symbols as the cube. The room hummed with a deep, unnatural energy, like something inside was still alive. Lysara let out a shaky breath. We shouldn't be here. Ethan arched a brow. Then why did you steal the cube in the first place? She turned to him sharply, her voice suddenly desperate. Because the Dominion was going to open this. Ethan's pulse quickened. Lysara placed a hand on the vault door. This isn't just a warship, Ethan. It's a tomb. And whatever's inside, it's still waiting. Then, the symbols on the vault flared to life. A low hiss echoed through the chamber. The doors began to open. The forgotten enemy. Ethan took a step back, his instincts screaming that this was a very bad idea. The vault doors groaned as they slid apart, revealing a chamber filled with rows of stasis pods, each containing a dark, shadowed figure inside. And then, one of them moved. A long, clawed hand pressed against the glass from the inside. Lysara's breath hitched. It's waking up. Ethan's hand tightened around his pistol. What the hell did you just do? The stasis pod cracked, steam hissing from the seal as the figure inside slowly emerged. A voice, deep, resonant, and utterly alien, filled the chamber. At last, the war begins again. Ethan's stomach dropped. This wasn't just an ancient warship. It was a prison. And they had just released the prisoner. The real war begins. A blast of energy suddenly ripped through the chamber, sending Ethan and Lysara flying backward. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Alarms blared. The ship was coming back to life. Ethan groaned, pushing himself up as the shadowed figure stepped forward. It was tall, armored in sleek, organic plating, its eyes glowing with unnatural fire. Lysara scrambled back, terror in her expression. No, this isn't possible. Ethan didn't take his eyes off the creature. What is that? Lysara's voice was barely a whisper. The last precursor. The one who started the war. The figure turned its head, its piercing gaze landing on Ethan. Then it smiled. And now, you will help me finish it.